right, folks. Here we are. We're starting our webinar here. Now, I'll announce right at the beginning that we are missing one panelist. He wound up was sick this morning when he got up, so he won't be attending. I wasn't able to find a replacement, but I've also lost about 250 pounds. So I'll cover his segment later on in the broadcast. So we are going to start with Mark Ennis, and he's going to talk to us about metabolic science and how he helps people with it and how he's helped himself with it.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Dave. Okay, so first of all, I want to talk about what metabolic health is first. So in my opinion, metabolic health is when your body doesn't function properly. It's not running optimally. And then over time, it's going to lead to chronic disease. Chronic diseases such as type 2, obesity, dementia, mental health, the list goes on and on and on. Heart disease, obesity, things like that. And I believe that most people we're all focusing on the wrong problem. A lot of people want to become insulin sensitive. They think the best way to do this is through exercise. And a lot of people think that they're eating properly. But the problem is a lot of people are still struggling. So the question is this, like, where are we going wrong? And this is where a lot of people at the moment are relying on medication. A lot of people are relying on medication. You only have to look around now. A lot of people are focusing on these weight loss injections. So this is where we need to be focusing on more of our health instead of just focusing on how we actually look, because that's the problem at the moment. You can look amazing, but if you've developed pre-diabetes along the way, it means absolutely nothing. If you're in severe pain, joint pain, back pain, it's affecting your mental health, all these health issues along the way. This is what we should be focusing on. This should be the goal. This is what I struggled with for a long, long time. I've been in this industry now for well over 25 years. I used to coach this way to people. And I used to get questions like, Mark, I'm still in pain. I'm still struggling with my food. I have these regular cravings. How come I can't sustain my weight loss? Why do I have to binge at the weekend? All these things that I used to get told in the past, and I didn't know how to answer them. And it was the same with me. I used to be able to lose the weight, and then I would easily regain the weight. I could go on a low-calorie diet, and I would really, really struggle. And it wasn't until I came across Carnivore 4 years ago, and I learned an awful lot about metabolic health. Now I understand what sugar addiction was. Now I understand what food addiction is. And this is what I'm trying to educate people now on a daily basis. We should be focusing on the root of the problem. So where does that root of the problem come from? It comes from an excess of sugar. Now, people need to understand this, that when we look at sugar, we're not just talking about processed sugar, like normal sugar that you put in a cup of tea. No, we're talking about everything, guys, like carbohydrates, processed food, fruits. Like, these are all going to impact the body the exact same way. Now, what happens when you put too much sugar into the body? It leads to inflammation. It leads to chronic inflammation. This is where we're all suffering at the moment. The key is we need to remove the inflammation. How do we do this? Very, very simple. We keep our insulin levels low and we keep our leptin levels high. So what we need to be focusing on is a rich protein and fat diet. And that's coming from the carnivore diet. If there's any vegetables in there, that's fine. If you have no gut issues, then by all means you keep them in. But if you guys are on a carnivore diet and you're eating your vegetables and you're still having issues like autoimmune issues, IBS, you just feel that something's not right. Your energy is not good. You just feel crap on a daily basis. Well, this could be the last part that you need to remove, which is the vegetables. So it's very, very important that we optimize our health. It's very, very important that we look at hormones and not just calories. The body has no idea what a calorie is. Your body's not run off calories. Your body's run off hormones. There's many, many factors what we need to be focusing on. I've just mentioned insulin. I've mentioned leptin, but cortisol is another big factor. People don't understand that, yes, stress in your life is absolutely fine, but when it becomes chronic, there's the problem right there. And if we go back to what people are doing at the moment, people are exercising every single day. They're doing too much cardio. And this is going to affect stress. This is going to affect your sleep. This is going to affect your eating habits. and you're not going to feel good at all doing it. And plus, if you're doing cardio every single day and you're on a restriction diet, guys, you're going to be miserable. It's only a matter of time before you're going to give up. You're going to quit. I think I was talking about exercise, wasn't I?
Yeah, you got into that.
Yeah.
Exercise.
Right. So, okay. So I'll just finish off. Yeah. So basically, when we look at cortisol, we know cortisol, stress is good, but too much stress it causes a problem. And this is what people are actually focusing on. They're doing too much exercise. It's going to impact their hunger. It's going to impact their sleep. It's going to impact their digestion. And this is where people are really, really struggling. So if there's too much stress on the body, this is going to lead to a sugar or an insulin spike, a sugar spike, a glucose spike, and this is where people struggle with their hunger. So it's very, very important that we look at this as a lifestyle, this whole process as a lifestyle, and not just a quick fix. I think that's the most important thing. I think we need to move away from the diet culture. The diet culture is actually ruining people, because this is where I see a lot of people struggling at the moment. And at the end of the day, if calories worked, we wouldn't be in a national health crisis at the moment with Ozempic, plain and simple. So yeah, that's what I'm coach. That's what I'm doing at the moment. That's why a lot of people, when they come to me, I get the same question all the time. Mark, I've done the diets. I've done it all. I've done the training. I don't know what's going on. I've been to the doctor. The doctor wants me to lose weight, but I'm struggling to lose weight. I don't know how to lose weight. Can you help me? And it's easily fixed. Easily fixed. Most people don't want to do it because they have that sugar addiction. So it's really hard. So it's like talking to an alcoholic and saying to an alcoholic, okay, listen, you're going to stop drinking from now on. It's not possible. That's why I love working with people for 6 months over to a year, because you have to build them into it nice and slowly. So yeah, that's pretty much where I'm focusing on at the moment. I'm focusing more on the health aspect. I couldn't care less how much weight you lose. I'm only interested in getting you healthy first. When you get healthy, it's going to have what you see on the outside is not a true reflection on what you see on the inside. And I always focus on what you see on the inside, because at the end of the day, you cannot see visceral fats. You can see you can see on the outside, but you can't see visceral fat. And this is what we should be focusing on: visceral fat around your organs, being healthy. The key to longevity is just doing the things that's going to keep you happy, giving your body the right nutrition, exercising a few times a week, not running yourself into the ground. Running yourself into the ground is actually going to do a lot more damage going forward. So I don't know if you want to ask me any questions there, Dave, but that's pretty much the bolts of it.
Well, we do have a couple of people in the chat. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask them. Unfortunately, Mark has a previous commitment, so he's going to have to head out here in about 18 minutes, or maybe actually about 15 minutes probably. So if you have any questions for him, now would be the time to ask. And I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to talk about autoimmune disease at this point. Now, the reason I'm talking about autoimmune disease is because I've put 7 autoimmune diseases of my own into remission. One of them is called Myasthenia Gravis. And by the time I was diagnosed with that, I was not only in a wheelchair and bedbound, but I couldn't speak. I couldn't swallow solid food. I could barely breathe. I couldn't walk or stand unassisted. And I was a few months away from death before they finally officially diagnosed me and started treatment. Now, even with their best treatments, which also included a thymectomy, so they removed the thymus, which is just above the heart. That's something that they will do for myasthenia gravis patients to lessen their symptoms. It made a small difference with me, but not a lot. Certainly a lot of pain to go through for not a lot of return. And after being bedridden for 10 years, I'd had enough. So I started doing research. Now, I'm not going to get into all the stuff that I tried. What I will say is that I made some discoveries. So first of all, your immune system, most of it lives in your gut. So if you have a healthy gut, your immune system is usually going to be healthy. If you have an unhealthy gut, your immune system will become unhealthy, and given time, it will often create autoimmune disease. Now, in my case, I did so much damage to my body that it just couldn't be fixed any other way than with the carnivore diet. Now, I had tried keto for a couple of years. It helped me lose weight. I had some minor improvements, but all the autoimmune stuff and mental illness and stuff that I deal with or dealt with, yeah, it wasn't really helped by keto. So I want to mention, I'm not going to out anybody, but I was chatting with somebody recently who has been carnivore for a while, and they add a couple of things that aren't really carnivore, and yet they've been healthy for years. It seems to be doing a great job for them. And so what they were eating is a little bit of dark chocolate, some avocado, and some blueberries. And so we were chatting that she had gone to her optometrist and they had found some pretty significant signs of myasthenia gravis. And they've got her booked for tests and all kinds of stuff. So, and some of them are very classic tests that they do to confirm myasthenia gravis. So this is why I tell people, if keto works for you and gives you all the healing you need, there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly fine. However, if you're in this type of a situation where you're still having health issues and you're not carnivore yet, pure, clean carnivore, that's probably your only option for healing. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that all autoimmune disease can be cured by carnivore. First of all, I'm not claiming a cure. I'm talking about remission. So let me repeat that and be very clear. I'm not talking about a cure for autoimmune. I'm talking about remission. So what that means to you is that if you go off the diet, it will return eventually. Now, I know this is a fact for myself anyway, because I was diagnosed the first time with myasthenia gravis when I was about 12 years old. My martial arts instructor caught it, and my told me I need to go see a doctor. My family doctor confirmed it. He set up an appointment with a specialist, like the neurologist. And in the meantime, my mom took me to a naturopath. And that naturopath put me on a restricted diet and a bunch of vitamins. And my myasthenia went into remission, complete remission, before I even saw the specialist in Edmonton. And his conclusion was that my doctor was wrong, that I couldn't possibly have gone into remission with vitamins and diet. So when the next time myasthenia started coming back on regular diet, that was the last thing they were looking at. And unfortunate, but sometimes this happens. And, you know, I had to get to a point where I realized that the doctors didn't have the right answers. They weren't helping me. I was still bedridden. And I needed to do something. And all those discoveries I made along the way led me to carnivore. And this is what's kept me healthy. I've helped some other myasthenia gravis patients as well as other autoimmune patients get into remission as well. And when I say remission, for those of you who are familiar with autoimmune and myasthenia, what I'm talking about is drug-free remission, okay? Because there are several types of remission. And there's been a little bit of confusion out there. And actually, a very nice lady not too long ago kind of filled me in on some more detail that even I wasn't aware of. So good information. Here's I want to get into a little bit of the science of why this happens the way it does, and other things in your body that are involved that are affected by diet. So first of all, let's deal with sugar and seed oils and that kind of thing. These items in particular, and processed foods, they begin to cause issues in the gut. And over time, they'll cause something called leaky gut. And leaky gut can turn into all kinds of other nasty diseases and is often the start of your first metabolic dysfunction and the beginnings of autoimmune disease. It often starts with the leaky gut. Now, the thing to remember too with sugar is when you're getting your energy from sugar, well, everything in your body is using that sugar for energy, including your mitochondria. Now, your mitochondria is something that exists for every cell in the body except red blood cells. Everything else they have from a few hundred to sometimes a few thousand, depending on what type of cell, where in the body it's located, that type of thing. So mitochondria will feed on sugar. They can survive, but they only have 25% of the energy on sugar that they do on ATP, which is converted directly from fat, dietary fat, or your own fat. So when you reduce over a long period of time the efficiency of your mitochondria, it loses its ability to not only heal, but to even recognize that there's a problem. And this is why cancer rates have skyrocketed in the last few decades, as well as so many other chronic diseases, because the mitochondria being fed sugar all the time can no longer recognize there's a problem. And even if it did, it couldn't fix it. So this is where the second half of chronic disease and autoimmune dysfunction come on. And now this particular type of dysfunction, this leads into issues with the brain. So this will feed into Alzheimer's or certain types of dementia. And matter of fact, Alzheimer's researchers are now referring to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes. So it's really serious. And these let's talk a little bit about seed oils and how they damage your gut. So seed oils or vegetable oils, when they are collected before, they're collected from all over the place, shipped across the country, sent to a factory. By the time they get to the factory, the oil's already rancid. So they have to put it through several processes of heating and bleaching and chemical cleaning and all this kind of stuff. And every time they cycle the heat, it creates long chain polymers in the oil. So it's basically turning it into a liquid plastic. And that liquid plastic, when consumed, will create chronic inflammation across the board. Everywhere in your body, it'll be just constant inflammation. And that constant inflammation is the root of most chronic disease. Now, Dr. Ken Berry, he said something that was pretty interesting, and I believe it. He said if the entire population stopped eating processed foods, sugars, and seed oils, 80% of all chronic disease, mental illness, and cancer would go away. Or, new cancer cases, kind of thing, would just go away. And there's the metabolic science now to back it up. And unfortunately, every time new science comes out, it'll debunk some of the old stuff, and then legacy media will take that old stuff and republish it, even though they know it's false. So this is what causes so much confusion. Now, I do have somebody in the chat. Lloyd Morgan. So he says, I have IBS since about 2013 and have had type 7 every day. I'm assuming is that type 1 maybe? 24/7 diarrhea since 15th of October last year. Yeah, that's pretty nasty stuff. Now, I had all kinds of issues with my gut, of course, because I had leaky gut. I had massive cramping and all kinds of nasty issues. And it took over 2 years carnivore for my gut issues to finally pretty much heal. I still have occasional little bouts now and then. Not really diarrhea, but I'll have like loose stool once in a while if I eat too much fat. But that's fairly normal for carnivores if they eat too much fat. But yeah, it took over 2 years. I think it was like 25 and a half or 26 months or something for my guts to finally settle down, even on pure carnivore. So Lloyd says, I've been carnivore since around 2016. Before that, keto, and before that, low FODMAP. Now, I've heard of FODMAP. I don't know a lot about it. One of my sisters does FODMAP. She's had pretty decent success. Bristol stall chart, type 1 to type 7.
Can I mention what
I assume you're talking about diabetes?
Can I mention
Yeah,
what
go ahead.
is for people? It's fermentable oligosaccharides disaccharides, and polyols. So it's basically all the just so people, if they hear FODMAP, they know what it is. It's everything that goes ferments in your stomach, right? The sugars, basically.
Okay, nice. So that's that kind of covers what I wanted to cover at this point. Of course, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat, and we'll get to them as we have pauses in the conversation. So I'm going to turn this over to Peter now, and he's going to talk to us about diabetes, specifically in his case, type 1, and what Carnivore's done for him. Take it away, Peter.
Yeah. So as Dave mentioned, I'll talk about type 1 diabetes. I'm a type 1 diabetic myself, and why should you listen to a type 1 diabetic? Why should you even be interested? Well, the funny thing about type 1 diabetes is you have to inject your own insulin, and by doing so, you see all the sides of the metabolic equation, of metabolic health. So you see sugar and carbohydrate intake, protein intake, all those things. You see what it does to your blood glucose, and you see how much insulin you have to inject. And in that way, you are, although it's not very nice to have a type 1 diabetes, you're in a very special position because you see exactly how much insulin you need to metabolize food. And yeah, that's for type 1 diabetics very interesting because mainstream recommendations are to eat a lot of carbohydrates and that sort of things, basically to follow a standard diet almost for diabetics. And the whole problem with diabetes is that you can't metabolize carbohydrates. So you have to inject insulin in my case, or you have to take medicine in the case of type 2 diabetes, or you have to do something about your diet and try to reverse or minimize the effects of type 2 diabetes, for example. But that's not what's being told in the mainstream medicine. They'll tell you to follow standard diets, eat enough carbohydrates, and eat enough times during the days, and also include snacks to balance out your blood glucose. So they focus all on the blood glucose, but it is in the end about insulin and the fact that you can't metabolize carbohydrates and glucose especially. So that's, in my opinion, where you have to go and look as a type 1 diabetic, but also as a normal person. If you don't have diabetes, you should try to minimize insulin. And of course, you can have a few insulin spikes during the day. That's actually very healthy. But a lot of spikes aren't good because every time that you get an insulin spike, every time that you eat, you'll get inflammation. And if you eat 3 times a day and you include snacks every time in between, your body will be constantly inflamed. You get insulin, which is also a fat storage hormone. You get sugar rises and dips. You'll get hungry because your insulin is elevated, all those things. And for me, a lot of things changed because I'm a type 1 diabetic for 16 years and I did reasonably well, also according to doctors. My HbA1c was already at 5.6 10 years ago, for example. But I feel like crap because during the day, my average was okay, but it would go up and down, the sugar. And of course, I also followed the advice of eating enough, correcting my blood glucose with carbohydrates. And I was feeling lousy and it was disrupting my daily life. And about 2 or 3 years ago, I came across the ideas of Dr. Bernstein. And every diabetic and also non-diabetic should at least look up a video of him. And if you have some more time, do read his book, The Diabetes Solution. And he talks about the law of small numbers. And basically, that's very insightful, not just for us, but for anybody. The whole idea of low-carb diets and human-appropriate diets is basically to lower carbohydrates and lower all the variations during the day. You'll have stable energy, all those things. And that's the way humans should eat. So you shouldn't eat, for example, 100 grams of carbohydrates in a meal and do that 3 times a day. So in order to keep your diabetes under control, I think the very minimum, even if you don't go low carb, because my name is the Dutch Carnivore, that's only because I'm on a carnivore diet. But in my opinion, you can also go low carb, keto, ketovore, even medium carb if you're active and if you don't have troubles with autoimmune issues, that sort of things. You can also go to 100 grams of carbs a day if you're a very active person, and you'll be able to keep your diabetes under control, because this law of small numbers tells you that if you eat small amounts of sugar, especially if you avoid sugar and you replace it with protein, you'll get low inputs, and you can correct it with small amounts of insulin and also with slower insulin. And what happens on a sugar-rich diet is you have to match very steep peaks of short duration of glucose. You have to match them also with the peaks of the ultra-rapid insulin. And in the 20th century, they invented this ultra-rapid insulin analogs, basically to deal with extreme cases of type 2 diabetes, very carb-rich diets, all just to cover those extremely huge insulin spikes, glucose spikes. And that's just going in the opposite direction of where we should go. So treating diabetes is about lowering the insulin, and of course, in the case of type 1 diabetes, to match the insulin with the requirements, but not to overload your body with a lot of insulin. That's not just healthy in a blood glucose management way, but insulin is also anabolic, and it can have effects on cancer growth, even that sort of things. So there is no reason why you should have a hyperinsulinemic state in your body. That's the thing. And actually, I would go that far that if you're a diabetic, it's more important to lower insulin than have perfect blood glucose control. So if your A1C is a 5.5, which is around the upper limit, but you have very good control, that is better than being on a A1C of 4.5 and having to inject loads of insulin to get to that point. You should only get to that point by a proper diet, basically. And yeah, that's a proper diet means also so low in carbohydrates, and don't get fooled by the ideas of the standard diet that you should go for low glycemic foods, for example, because I tried all those things in the past. And I think many carnivores and many ketoers and all of us have tried all these false friends, let's say, of high fiber foods, low glycemic foods, adding in supplements, because with diabetes you have those as well. You can take cinnamon, for example, and they tell you that your blood glucose control will improve. But in the end, you try it for some weeks and it never works. And low glycemic foods, it's the same story. They might give you the idea that it works a little bit, but why does it work? Because you switch from white bread to lentils, for example. Well, there are two different things about it. White bread is hyper palatable, so you'll eat a lot. If you switch to lentils, you'll eat far less. You will not combine it with who knows what, ketchup and all the nice things that you can have with the white bread. So it's all confusing stuff. And fiber as well. If I get a type 1 diabetic that asks me for advice when they are just diagnosed, I actually will tell them that if they eat carbs, they should stick, for example, to simple carbs like potatoes. So I'm not recommending high carb diets, of course, but you stick to potatoes instead of going to salads and lentils and all these fibers, because fiber is highly unpredictable. So it sounds very nice. And if you're fine tuning, if you're an expert, you might utilize it in some ways. But in the end, they are all confounders. And that made me very mad as a diabetic in the past. So I've been doing all these things for 10 years. And this I try to advise now to diabetics is you have to minimize all the variation in your life, in your diet. So that comes to the low carb and the low insulin, of course, but also variations in lifestyle. So I try to avoid eating 3 to 4 hours before sleeping. And you hear this a lot also in the carnivore community. It's not good to have your body and your digestive system running while sleeping. I actually would feel warm even if I do so. But for diabetics, of course, that's really problematic because you'll have to rely on your CGM and wake up and inject insulin halfway the night and all those things. And the funny thing is, a lot of the things in the carnivore diet community, I already did as a diabetic before starting. And that are things like fasting, intermittent fasting. They are just perfect, because if you want a simple hack to improve your diabetes and your metabolic health, your blood glucose control, is get the blood glucose levels during sleep in order, skip a meal so that during the entire morning your blood glucose flatlines and your insulin levels are low. And yeah, those things in the mainstream recommendations, you don't get to hear them, because diabetics are advised to eat all day, because doctors are, of course, afraid of hypoglycemia and that sort of things. And yeah, that's in my opinion the most important thing for diabetes, to reduce all the dynamics in daily life. And yeah, maybe one final note. That's a question I get a lot. When people consider going low carb or keto, then from doctors they'll hear that it's risky and that they need to take precautions to prevent diabetic ketoacidosis. And I'll actually argue that going low carb and having better blood glucose control will help you to prevent ketoacidosis, because the whole problem, when you look around on social media, especially on TikTok, you'll see all the diabetics eating high carb diets. And if they forget to inject insulin, they'll get a sugar spike, of course. But for them, it's normal to see those sugar spikes on a daily basis sometimes. So they will not consider the possibility that it might also be caused by the fact that insulin is missing, because that's the leading cause of diabetes, the diabetic ketoacidosis. So you will see very often people going to the hospital with hyperglycemic DKA of like 300 milligrams per deciliter. But that doesn't happen on a low carb diet. If my blood glucose goes towards 180, 200, I need to see very good reasons that it goes there. So in extreme cases that I do eat some carbs. But otherwise, for me, that's an urgent reminder that I should check my ketones. And so far, this actually has never happened. Because, yeah, if any anomaly occurs on a low carb diet, everything is smooth and steady. And yeah, you see everything immediately.
All right. Thank you, Peter. So I'm going to be taking Anthony's place. So I'm going to talk about weight loss and carnivore. And before I get into it, I want to address something that I saw the other day. And I don't know why people keep posting this stuff, but I want to address it. So what they had said in their post was that humans should be plant-based because, and then they list off all this stuff. We've got the same digestion as a bonobo or a chimpanzee, and they eat lots of plants. Okay, we'll talk about that. And that we don't have a high enough stomach acid to be carnivores, and that we've got teeth meant for eating plants. So this is what they claimed. So here's how I'm going to address this. First of all, we do not have the same digestive system as a chimp or a bonobo. They eat far more plants. And yes, a bonobo or a chimp will go and they'll kill another ape and they'll tear him up and eat him. So yeah, I mean, they can be omnivorous just like humans. However, they eat a lot more plants. And gorillas, for instance, they eat almost exclusively plants and maybe a few bugs and stuff. So they've got much larger large intestine and a much shorter small intestine. Now, small intestines are designed to absorb meat as it's being broken down by bacteria and enzymes. Right? And it's the large intestine that's meant to deal with plant matter and fiber and those types of things. So we don't have a great deal of large intestine. Yes, we can eat plants. We're meant to deal with them to a degree, but we're not meant to have them all the time. And The next thing is our acid in our stomach. There's only a couple of animals on the planet that happen to be scavengers that eat a lot of rotten meat that have a higher level of acidity than we do. And humans, for the most part, aside from those couple of examples, we have the highest level of stomach acid of any animal on the planet other than these scavengers. And that high acid rate is designed to break down meat so that it can be digested in the gut. So that right there, that statement of saying, you know, our stomach acid isn't high enough to be carnivore is completely false. And it's provably false. I mean, you can easily look it up on Google yourself. This information isn't hard to find. Now, I want to point out that animals, for instance, that eat plants almost exclusively, their teeth generally continue to grow constantly. Now, farmers and ranchers know this because horses in particular, because their diet has been changed by domestication, their teeth grow too fast all the time to accommodate the plants and grains and stuff they're actually eating instead of what they would normally eat in the wild. So a farmer has to take something called a float or a file. It's basically a giant file for a horse's mouth, and they stick it in there and they actually file the horse's teeth down, top and bottom. And they have to do that because if his teeth get overgrown, he can't eat anymore. And they're growing so fast to deal with all the plants. That's what they're for. That type of teeth is for that. Look at a beaver, for instance. Their teeth never stop growing because they're always chewing on plants and wood and that kind of thing, right? So trying to compare us to chimpanzees or other creatures just doesn't work. It's kind of meaningless because we are completely different than any other animal on the planet. I mean, even as close as we are to some primates, you know, there's still, you know, a couple percentage difference points in our genetics, and that makes all the difference. So when people try and tell you that humans are supposed to be plant-based, it's completely and provably false. So, and I'm not saying that humans are designed to be exclusively carnivore. I'm not saying that. I've never said that. Okay. But for certain people who have damaged their bodies so bad, carnivore may be the only option. Now, in the wild, so to speak, you know, normally we only had plants available in season, right? So end of the year or maybe middle of the year for some stuff, right? So it was like a short season that we had access to once in a while. We weren't meant to be spiking sugar in our system all the time and eating carbs and plants on a regular basis. We're not designed for that. We were designed to be omnivores that can mostly eat meat and fat and occasionally can use and live on plants and stuff, but it's never as good, it's never as efficient. And when it comes to losing weight, these other foods that we're eating is what's blocking us from losing weight. So the way this works is when you eat anything that spikes your insulin, okay, once that insulin rises to deal with the glucose in your system, you are prevented from losing weight. And it just completely blocks it. And there are also many foods that block our ability to feel full. So that satiety signal. And satiety signals actually exist at two levels. You've got the first one that's triggered when you have enough dense nutrition in your stomach and you don't need any more at that time. You'll get that first satiety signal. And then if you continue to eat and you absolutely stuff your stomach to bursting, you'll get another signal. So what happens when you're eating processed foods and carbs and sugars, and certainly there are certain types of foods like legumes, for instance, they'll suppress your leptin, and ghrelin is also a factor. And if you're messing with those hormones, you absolutely are not going to be able to lose weight. So if you get that stuff out of your system, once your system goes into ketosis, then you can start burning your own fat. When you eat something that your body does not recognize and it doesn't know what to do with, it'll take whatever calories it gets out of it and store it as fat. So for those who think artificial sugar is a good way to go, it's not, because your body doesn't understand what artificial sugar is. To it, it's just a chemical that tastes sweet. So the best evidence it has is that it must be sugar because it tastes sweet, which triggers your pancreas to produce insulin. And then, of course, you get a spike in insulin, even though you didn't have any actual sugar. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to this. If you eat something that is sweet, but happens to be something your body recognizes that it needs, and it's not actually sugar, it won't spike your insulin. Two examples I'm personally aware of is glycine, which Tony was talking about earlier, and allulose. They're both like an amino acid that the body needs, and it recognizes it, so it will not spike your insulin. And there are people that claim that when you eat meat and fat, it will spike your insulin. Well, it does and it doesn't. So it actually does produce a little bit of glucose, but it's converting most of the energy into ATP. And that actually does not spike your insulin, even though maybe your liver is producing a little bit of the glucose that you need, because a lot of people aren't aware that your liver will take meat and fat, or fat specifically, and it will create any glucose it needs for your body. So you don't need to consume external glucose. Your body will produce all the glucose that you need. And when you're only getting the amount of glucose that your organs and tissues require, it doesn't spike your insulin, because your body needs to process it and not get rid of it some other way, like with insulin. So when you eat a pure carnivore meal, you don't get that big spike in insulin. You might get a tiny bump, and that's about it. So this is why carnivore works so well for weight loss, for the most part. Now, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. As you lose a bunch of weight, you'll start to hit plateaus where your metabolism will reach, what's the term? Hormosis, I think it's called, where everything's kind of balanced.
Homeostasis?
And I think that's it. So you have to go out and change up what you're eating from time to time. And sometimes you got to do some things to shock your metabolism and kind of break things loose again. I've struggled with that a lot. Now, I've lost just a hair under 250 pounds since I started this journey. Now, some of that came off with keto, to be fair, but when I got stuck, and I moved to carnivore to lose more weight, and then discovered that it healed all the autoimmune stuff, which was pretty shocking, the way that all happened. So I've lost a fair chunk of weight, and with that, I've done some fasting. I've done some prolonged fasting to help, break things loose and move things along. And these are strategies that we can use. Some other issues that you deal with when you're losing an extreme amount of weight is you get all this, as your skin starts to sag because you're losing all the fat out of it, right? That hangs down, and you get constant infections and all kinds of stuff that you have to deal with. If I try to jog somewhere without a shirt on, it sounds like a dozen people clapping for a performance. I've got skin flapping everywhere. It's ridiculous. So these are some of the things that we deal with extreme weight loss. Now, I will say that a lot of the skin has shrunk to some degree, but there's only so much that autophagy is going to do to reduce your skin. I know Dr. Barry says you can reduce it, and for most people that's true. But when you're losing this kind of level of weight, surgery is going to be probably required to take it off. So, and I've still got like about another 75 pounds to go. So I was, for those who are interested, I was 540 pounds. All this started.
Can I just jump in there, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to like excess skin and dead skin, fasting is amazing. But what's also important is you need to focus on building muscle. This is what I see an awful lot of women, especially big women. They lose all this weight and then they have all this loose skin on their bodies. But this can be easily achieved through fasting. Like, fasting's amazing. But you have to basically replace that with muscle. So if you do both of them together, then you can actually tighten that skin up. I've done it many times. Like I've got many photographs. I've got many testimonials to prove that this can be achieved. You don't need to go down the surgery route and get it all cut off. You just need to implement a few things. And strength training, especially for women, strength training is key. It's absolutely essential. And when it comes to fasting, I'm a big fan of fasting, but I'm also a big fan of protein modified fasts. So basically what this is we want to spare the muscle by giving the muscle protein it needs. Fasting is amazing. Don't get me wrong. Fasting is absolutely amazing for gut health and things like that. But where I see the biggest benefits is when we're focusing more on the protein modified fast, because that's where you're going to tighten up the skin a lot faster.
Okay. Yeah, I will definitely be giving that a shot. I do know that part of the reason fasting is so effective is because when you're eating, your body is expending about 60% of that food's energy to digest it.
Yeah.
So if you're fasting, you've got that excess 60% energy that was being used to digest now can be directed towards healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whatever that might look like for you. I mean, everybody's got different healing to do, and it happens at different speeds. I know I get a lot of questions from people where they're saying, why isn't this healing me? And I mean, well, is there any difference? Well, yeah, it's a little bit better. So I usually have to explain to them, look, you didn't get sick overnight. You ate this way for years, decades, many decades in my case. So you're not going to heal overnight. It took time to get this bad. It's going to take time to heal. And I know lots of people in the carnivore community that, you know, that 5 years in and there's stuff that's still healing. You know, when you're really sick, it takes time to heal. You know, the first thing you have to heal is your own mitochondria before it can help heal anything else. It all takes time. So I want to, if there's no immediate questions, I want to turn it over to Tony. He's going to talk to us about mental health and low carb and carnivore.
Cool. I'm going to try and keep this brief because I can ramble for quite a bit. So first of all, and Dave, sorry, I apologize for saying that. Homeostasis is like your body's cruise control. Hormesis is a little bit of poison makes you stronger. So it's a little bit of stress that makes you, so like exercise would be like a hormetic stressor. And, you know, they have theories that plants are, you know, xenohormetic. But anyway, so mental health. Firstly, I am not a doctor. I am not a scientist. And quite often the guys in this panel, we talk about that quite a bit. But I have become, my ability to just use logic and reason with my brain. And there's a couple things that I want to talk about today that are there's no coincidences. And first thing I'm going to posit is, if you just take a look around in social media, in this community, the carnivores, the people, it's no coincidence that most carnivores are so cool. They're easygoing, they're chill. And that seems to be a general, you know, framework of they're very approachable, they're willing to help. And that, you know, with mental health. Now, when we're dealing with mental health, we put it into categories: anxiety, depression, ADHD, all these things. And there is no coincidence that every single treatable, diagnosable issue is going up. From ADHD to anxiety, people are on anxiety medication, you know, the SSRIs, the benzodiazepines. They're just, it's really an epidemic that I think, you know, it's not so much specific as taking the whole into play. Now, where I come from, my story was, you know, I was suffering from severe insomnia. I would hit the pillow exhausted and my brain would light up and I would go into almost borderline panic attacks. And although I was too proud to go to the doctor and get diagnosed with anything, I knew there was something seriously wrong. And, you know, I was a horrible student. I couldn't think very well. I was very erratic, angry, emotional. A lot of stuff in my life, the lows happened because of anger and lashing out. And, you know, I thought I was right and all this stuff. And I never really thought that that was to do with mental health. I thought it was just me. And that's, I think, what happens nowadays is we get gaslit. We get told, you know, telling somebody who's suffering from depression to think positively. Like, there's some things that just can't be done. And I think what we miss is the foundations. So, you know, in my clinical practice, I practice laser acupuncture. A lot of people come in for anxiety and depression, and I end up asking them how's their diet, and they look at me like, you know, gobsmacked about I'm asking them about diet when they're suffering with anxiety or severely depressed. And the problem is, yes, that's a prophylactic treatment that might rebalance you, and it works, but it doesn't address the root causes. And the root causes of this stuff, we get told that we're broken. We get told that our brains are malfunctioning or there's something wrong with us. And quite often, because of where I'm at, I've looked changing my diet, going carnivore, going high fat specifically, and adequate to high protein. There's certain things that have popped up where I've seen coincidences. And when you sort of scale back the thing and look at what goes on with neurotransmission and hormones, and it's kind of funny because I'm listening to all of you guys, your talks, this all coincides together. It's mental health is health, like, you know, metabolic health, autoimmune, all these things are we box them. And mental health, everything we're human beings and we need nutrition. So we can argue plant-based, we can argue animal-based, carnivore, but we need nutrition is nutrition. And where we get it, sure, we can argue. But what our body actually needs for functioning properly, specifically our brains, we need it. So how you get it can be very subjective, but the point is we need it. And quite often, when I'm talking to people that have been diagnosed with something or they're on medications, I ask them if the doctor's ever talked about nutrition. They say no. And I say, has the doctor ever talked about side effects? And they say no. They gave me a pamphlet and you read the side effects. So you're on brain medication with a pamphlet that's telling you all the side effects that you might incur. And no one's ever talked about possible nutrition deficiencies, possible lack of nutrition causing these things. And so I was like just inspired to start doing some of my own research. And a lot of these things that I'm going to talk about are very maybe coincidence, but it's not surprising because we don't even talk about what anxiety or depression or like the stress. So the nervous system, the immune system, everything gets tied in together. And when you're not working optimally, when something is not working well, we just say it's that. And I believe it's a whole big picture, and it starts with foundations. Essential amino acids. Now, if we look at essential amino acids, and, you know, obviously coming from the carnivore side of things, we don't have to think about it because meat has it all. We don't have to think about amino acid ratios, rate limiting amino acids, and you can get into the weeds with this stuff. But when we talk about these essential amino acids, these are our building blocks. We are required to consume them in the right amounts for them to do things. And then they do a bunch of different combinations in our bodies, in our brains, our hormones, our peptides. And when we're looking at the brain specifically, you know, what's it made of? It's made of fat and cholesterol. We know this. So the tissues that we're saying to eat less of and moderate of are the stuff that we're made of. And not to mention, when we're getting told to eat 6 to 11 servings of grains a day, you know, 30 to 40% of your meals are your food should be carbohydrates. Well, that ratio, we're saying to eat the stuff that we don't need and require, and we're limiting the stuff that we do need, essential amino acids and fatty acids, vitamins and minerals. So and it's really hard, and I don't want to be offensive to anybody that's suffering from mental health because, you know, this is a very complex thing, but there's certain things that I believe foundationally that we can do that can build the resilience that helps people cope. Now, the difference with me is I still feel anxious from time to time. I still feel depressed from time to time. But why does that not snowball into severe depression or panic attacks? And I believe, like in my opinion, it's nutrition. It's the foundations. And if we start with just what the brain does, and firstly, actually, I'd like to say, if anybody'd like to see how diet can affect their mental health, I would strongly recommend checking out Dr. Georgia Eid and Dr. Chris Palmer, because they are, I believe they might even be both Harvard trained psychiatrists that are using diet and lifestyle to address serious mental issues, from bipolar to schizophrenia to severe depression. So check those guys out, and they've got a lot of talks on the internet. But for this, I just want to bring into some things into perspective that we may not ever connect. Now, when we're dealing with what happens with our brain, we have this little thing in our brains. It's called the amygdala, and it's responsible for the protecting us. It's like, I guess they could call it like the instinctive brain, where something happens something happens to you, the amygdala reacts, and it causes reactions. So fear, anger, anxiety. And we think that's a bad thing, but realistically, that's just really trying to protect you. So we come from a place of, oh man, I'm anxious and that's bad. But our bodies are actually telling us stuff. So through hormones and neurotransmitters, these signals are being emitted. Now, the difference between somebody having a panic attack and somebody being resilient, in my opinion, is possibly nutrition. So the difference between going out of control emotionally and being able to be refined and in control, there's a lot of things that go on, like tied to the nervous system, tied to the immune system even. So these things we don't talk about, and the amygdala is being responsible for it. Just understanding where this is coming from can help people realize that you're not broken. It's a natural, instinctive, protective mechanism. Now we're going to get into some things with the nervous system, and I know Myasthenia Gravis, David knows a lot about this. Just the nutrient choline that's found in meat and eggs, that is the precursor to acetylcholine, is directly responsible about how your nervous system is. We have an autonomic nervous system, two sides of it. It's kind of going back and forth all the time. Parasympathetic is your rest and digest. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight and flight. If your body is constantly in fight or flight and you don't have the ability to actually come out of it, well, that instigates a whole other hormonal cascade, cortisol, adrenaline. So now your nervous system's on overtime. You can't get back into that rest and digest stage. And really, the one nutrient that is really helps you do that is choline. Now, eating a low-fat, plant-based diet will not be sufficient enough choline, and it's just, that's just one example. So we have the nervous system that when the amygdala triggers and you go into these emotional feeling states, your nervous system is trying to protect you. So we don't recognize the difference between anxiety or getting chased by a tiger. So when we're getting chased by a tiger, it's survival. Now, if you don't have the right nutrition to bring those neurotransmitters back into balance in your nervous system, back into a parasympathetic rest and digest state, you're going to be constantly in that sympathetic, and that's stress, which stress causes damage. Stress depletes minerals, stress depletes nutrients. So it's very broad, and we always look at it like it's just anxiety, which, I'm not saying just stop your medication. I'm saying it's these building blocks are essential for our brain function and our hormonal function. And it often ties into these 9 essential amino acids. Now, we look at today's modern world with mental health, and it's something we don't look at. We've never been this inundated with technology. We've never had screens at our disposal 24/7, swiping left, swiping right. That is overloading dopamine. Now, dopamine, people think is the good feeling, but it's actually a pursuit and reward neurotransmitter that's made from tyrosine, which is it's a conditionally essential amino acid. But when your body gets flooded with dopamine, there's going to be a release. Now, that's what people can argue about that being depressive, but I believe the ability to replenish dopamine based on amino acids and the nutrition would help people deal with these things. So the modern day, all this constant stuff, everything is depleting us of these things. We're oversensitive. Our nervous systems are hyperactive, which makes our immune systems hyperactive. Now, if you don't have the right building blocks, your Jenga tower is going to fall. And the ability to get back up, to build it back up, I believe, and it's not a coincidence, that the carnivore diet takes away the thought you're getting enough amino acids, you're getting enough structure, and we're going to get into the fat a little bit in a second. Now, another problem that I think most people don't really associate to mental health is monocrop agriculture, processed food. How? Well, we have this chemical that they believe is safe, according to the FDA. I know in Canada we use it still, it's sold. It's called glyphosate. Now, there's a few problems with this where they don't test for this, but glyphosate is made from glycine, which is a conditionally essential amino acid that we can make, but if the and this is in theory, but there's some very serious scientists that have sort of posited this, and it's not a coincidence. It tricks your body into not producing glycine. Glycine is responsible for a lot of things, for glutathione, for collagen production. All the ladies out there, glycine is really important. And it's in the connective tissue. So if you're drinking bone broth and connective stuff, the gristle, that's high in glycine. But this glyphosate now is made from the amino acid glycine. So it's an offshoot of it. Your body doesn't recognize the difference. Well, what do you think happens? And if you look at these 9 essential amino acids and just do a little bit of research, look at the if you're deficient in one of these 9 essential amino acids, look at the side effects: brain fog, chronic fatigue, lethargy, all of these similarities because of these deficiencies in amino acids, which we need. And that also, the glyphosate, this is a little bit of theory. And once again, I'm just going to refer to Dr. Zach Bush, who does a lot of work with the modern day farming, and he's an oncologist, but he's amazing. He might not be as pro meat as we are, but that's okay. But he's come up with this. The plants absorb amino acids like we do, but they do it through a thing called the shikimate pathway, and that involves the plants producing phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan. Now, why do I say those things? We talked about dopamine. Tyrosine is essential for the production and recycling of dopamine. Phenylalanine actually makes us produce tyrosine. And tryptophan, speaking of mental health, and I know this is kind of going off, but I'm going to bring it back right now. Tryptophan is responsible for the serotonin to melatonin cascade. So you have serotonin, which is your good feeling hormone, melatonin, which helps you sleep and is a major antioxidant. If you're deficient in tryptophan, how are you supposed to feel good? So you have those 3 amino acids that are affected by the plant's ability to produce them. Do you think if you ingest that chemical, even though it's a different pathway, that might be blocking our ability to use those amino acids? So these things are tied directly into diet. And this is something that most people don't realize with mental health, is if you want your brain to work better, give it the stuff it needs. And in my opinion, the best thing you can do is eat a lot of whole complete protein that you don't have to think about it, because all these amino acids are in there. The choline as well. Now, just to get back into this tryptophan, serotonin, when we're dealing with mental health, and I don't mean to minimize this, but we never talk about the nutritional side. The doctors never talk about what nutrients you may require. And now coming back to the fat. So we've talked a little bit about this with nervous system. The nerves have a myelin sheath, which is the substance that's made that protects them. When it gets degraded, and the easiest way to degrade it is by sugar, it's hyperactive. So your nervous system is already exposed and it's not getting to be able to be calm. So all these things tie in. When you cut out the grains, you're cutting out all the chemicals on the modern day agriculture. You're cutting out the sugar. You're keeping your immune system down. This is chronic systemic inflammation. There's so many avenues of this. And it's like, well, what does my gut have to do with my brain? Your vagus nerve. It's your pneumogastric nerve. It's your largest nerve in your body. It goes from your gut right up through to your brain, and it coordinates everything. So the microbiome is important. All these things, these processed foods, these modern day things, seed oils, sugar, break down your nervous system, basically, causing your body to panic. And that would be inflammation. It's not a physical thing. It can be it's a big systemic thing. So my thing, especially with myelin, is made from cholesterol. Well, why would we want to eat low fat to lower our cholesterol? And if that's not good enough, we lower it with medication. If we need cholesterol for our brain, if every cell in our body has a layer around it made of cholesterol, and the cholesterol is protecting your nervous system, why would we be lowering it, let alone with drugs? And we're not thinking cholesterol as good or bad. Cholesterol is vital for life, for animal life. So without cholesterol, we're dead in about 2 minutes. So protein and fat bring all these things to the table. And the takeaways I want, people to realize, what if these things directly affect your mental health? Would it not make sense to just cover the foundations, get what your body needs, and it's undeniable now. We've all seen this, talk to people, carnivores are getting better. It's more than weight loss. It's more than autoimmune. It's getting your diabetes in check, your metabolic health. All of it has a part to play. And when that happens, people come into this for their own reasons, but they find that other things have happened. Now, I love learning. I love reading. I'm hearing people's stories. My ability to retain information in the last 5 years, since I've been a carnivore, is ridiculous. I never would have thought I would be able to learn things like this and be actually willing to learn. And do you think that's a coincidence from a guy that was emotionally erratic? I was a horrible student in school, D's and A's. And I'll tell you, I wasn't diagnosed with ADD, but I couldn't pay attention. If I didn't want to hear it, I didn't hear it. And I think these are the biggest things just to realize, is that we are protein. We are amino acids. We need 9 essential. We must consume them. You can get it from the plant world, but you're going to have to combine, and it takes a lot of thinking. So it's not that it's impossible, but when we're eating meat from animals, the associated fat, we're getting all the essential nutrients that a body needs to not only heal, but optimize. And I think that's what we're seeing in this community, is the longer you go into this, you might have your own iteration of the diet, but focusing on the foundations and understanding how important these amino acids and fatty acids are for your neurotransmitters and for brain function. And I think that cascades over to resilience in your immune system, your nervous system, your metabolic system. And, that's kind of what I got to say without going for 3 hours, because we could really sidetrack this into a lot of rabbit holes. So hopefully that was okay. And is Dave there? Uh-oh.
No, we lost him.
But yeah. So anyway, that's my take on things, and I think it's very important, and it's very underlooked, especially when we deal with psychological and mental health.
Yeah, I think we covered some nice topics today that all fit into each other. And a nice conclusion, Anthony. Nice discovers it all.
Well, yeah. I mean, I believe it's all part of the picture, and it's kind of funny that I was thinking about that when Dave asked me to talk last about mental health, and like I'm just light bulbs are going off as all you guys are talking. It's like this is all part of it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's part compartmentalizing everything. I think we've got it wrong. In nature, there's figuring out what a human being needs, and then you go from there.
So I've got a question that I get. This comes up in discussion a lot. How much of your brain is made from cholesterol?
I think it's about 20%, 25%, something like that. Maybe. I think
it's actually 70.
It may be
It's 70%.
70%. Okay, well, I thought it was 70% fat, but you know what? I know it's fat and cholesterol, but that's 25% of your energy, your metabolic energy comes from your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and of all the cholesterol that's in your entire body, 25% is in your brain.
Okay, there you
But
go.
in the brain itself,
Yeah.
70% of it is got cholesterol in it.
Yeah, because I'm going to do a talk soon, a workshop, and I'm putting cholesterol on trial because I think there's a lot of stuff that people don't realize how important it is. And I mean, you know, Zoe Harcombe, I think, said one time, she's like, she was the first for me to hear it, but I mean, everybody that knows this. There's no good or bad cholesterol. It's a molecule. It's cholesterol. You know, we talk about LDL and HDL. That's not cholesterol. And I think that's the thing that we miss when someone says it's bad. You don't understand how important it is and how quickly we'd be dead without it.
Well, what people fail to see is that cholesterol is not bad. There's only one situation in which elevated cholesterol is bad, and that is when other risk factors for heart disease are at play. Because you can even see it in that recent keto CTA study. There are elevated plaque buildups and elevated cholesterols there. And of course, in those situations, it has to do with people that are dealing with, high blood pressure, for example, or metabolic syndrome. And in those cases, of course, a higher LDL will help to speed up the plaque buildup. But normally speaking, this is absolutely not an issue.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I think that's just another side of it. Like, I mean, your nervous system, I mean, the myelin, you need cholesterol, and cholesterol so I mean, still I talk to people and they don't believe you. They're like, oh no, my doctor. And I mean, I've gone through a lot of people's blood work, and I mean, I've seen it now over and over again, the metabolic factors, the high HDL, low triglycerides, and an elevated LDL. And it's like, you know, this is where it comes down to. You got to take a leap of faith and do your own due diligence, because, you know, in my opinion, that's healthy. You know, that's not a bad thing at all.
Well, I think where the problem lies is in the fact that those so-called normal cholesterol numbers are coming from a population where 93% of them have metabolic dysfunction.
No kidding.
So how are those the proper numbers to be using for cholesterol? It makes no sense.
Yeah. No.
So,
and I mean, we've talked about it, Peter, too, about plant sterols and how they mimic. It's like I talked about glycine in my presentation about glyphosate mimicking glycine. Well, that's what happens when we eat all these seed oils and they're bringing these plant sterols and these phytosterols to the table. They trick your body. It's close enough to cholesterol that your body doesn't make and recycle its own. So yeah, it's going to drop your cholesterol levels. But is that a good thing?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you get all the funny side paths, like oats being healthy because they lower your cholesterol by 5 or 10%. And that's just the biggest example of reductionist science, because who knows, maybe a lower cholesterol is even slightly healthier, but that doesn't mean that any food that lowers your cholesterol becomes suddenly healthy. That's exactly what happens with these plant sterols.
Yeah. And I mean, and quite a few. I don't mean to keep all the talk on cholesterol, but it's interesting because, you know, these are, your body makes it. You know, like people don't even realize that your body is responsible for 80 to 90% of the cholesterol in your body you make yourself, and the diet really doesn't have much of a factor in that number. And once people start hearing that, they're like, really? You know, yeah, you recycle it with bile, so it's probably a good idea to have a nice bile function. And we can get into a whole other rabbit hole with that.
That was funny, you know, when I first started this thing, some of the stuff that was healing was just phenomenal. Like, probably the first two things that happened kind of on the same day was my osteoarthritis went away. Got up one day about 2 weeks in, and I could actually see the veins and tendons in my hand, which I hadn't been able to do that for decades. You know, the swelling was just gone. And the brain fog left almost overnight, just gone. And then, like, when I was 19, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I didn't like what the medications did to me, so I didn't stay on them for more than a couple of years.
Yeah.
And so, went through all the constant nasty mood swings. And I noticed that at about 4 months carnivore, I wasn't having much for mood swings. And by 6 months, all symptoms were completely gone. I haven't had a bipolar incident since 6 months carnivore.
Yeah. Now,
And I've been
David,
doing this like almost 2.5 years.
is that a side effect or is that an effect?
Yeah. Well, it's funny when you say side effects, because back in the day, when I was still bedridden, I was on 19 prescription medications.
Wow.
Half of those were for side effects of the first half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it was insane. They had me on, I think, 4 different painkillers. They had me on Hydromorph. They had me on Dilaudid. They had me on Lyrica. They had me on Wellbutrin. And I mean, the dosages of these were incredible. I mean, the dosages of Hydromorph that I was taking a couple of time release doses a day, pretty high doses, and then I had the Dilaudid for breakthrough pain.
Yeah.
If somebody took just one of my Hydromorph doses that had never had morphine, they'd be dead in minutes.
Yeah. No kidding.
And I was on that for like 15 years almost.
Well, that's good for you, because like a lot of people don't realize this stuff. The problem with opioids and morphine too is the physical body dependency and tolerance, because that's the problem. And people think like people are weak when they're addicted to that, and it's like it's not the high or the feeling, it's the physical requirement that your body needs.
Withdrawals.
That's good for you to get down on that, because that's some serious stuff.
Withdrawals were absolutely brutal. It took me 9 months.
Yeah.
At first, my doctor didn't want to help me. He said, "You need this. Taking you off these painkillers could be harmful." And I said, "I don't care. I've got to get off them. I can't be on these drugs for the rest of my life. I won't.
Yeah.
If that kills me, it kills me, but I have to get off them."
Yeah.
And he still wouldn't help me until I had been tapering down for 6 months and couldn't taper down any further without a new prescription for smaller pills.
Good. Yeah.
So, and he finally relented and put me on a plan that I could get off the rest of them. But the fact that I had to fight for that was insane. I'm sorry, I don't mean to insult anyone, but that was just unbelievable. That he didn't want to help me get off the Hydromorph. Wow. Which is like a super concentrated morphine. Like it's a horrible drug.
Paul Mason says it best, right? We want to be deprescribing. Show me a doctor that does that. That's the sad truth.
Well, now I'm on 0 medications. Mm-hmm. So I do take some mineral supplements for my thyroid. And speaking of minerals, I wanted to talk about this real quick in regards to mental health, because it is important. I went to church with some people here where I live, and her name is Autumn Springham, and she has severe bipolar. Her mother took her own life.
Yeah.
She had attempted it a few times. She was in really bad shape. The medications weren't working. And now they found a different answer other than carnivore, but I think this is why carnivore works, because what they discovered was a particular mix of minerals that completely got rid of her bipolar. And it worked so well, like they actually, they hired, they got money and they hired a lab and they were having testing done. They were doing actual randomized control trials on this particular mineral grouping.
Yeah.
And it was proven to work. And as soon as it was proven to work, Health Canada raided them and tried to shut them down. Wow. And they actually wound up forcing them to have to move out of Canada to the US to be able to continue to make and sell this product.
That's horrifying.
And, as a carnivore, I don't need it, but I have used this product, and damn it, it works.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It just works. My bipolar went away when I was on this stuff. Now, it's by a company called True Hope. Mm-hmm. And Autumn was like the first patient. I went to church with her. I know her personally.
Yeah.
She's they're incredible people.
Yeah.
And to see the difference in her that this stuff made was absolutely incredible. I mean, it absolutely changed their lives.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand that, you know, the types of minerals that they were missing is probably what's found in a carnivore diet.
That's something that I didn't really get into, but if you look at mineral ratios and mineral requirements, minerals are like the spark plugs for everything. So if you're, and the problem is everybody, there are stages and these things can change, right? You know, the requirements can change, especially on how resilient your body is. So certain minerals will work really well at a certain point, and then they may not, you know, it gets complicated, but that makes perfect sense because quite often they're the thing that sparks and lets everything happen. So that was something that I didn't because I don't think I had enough time to get into, but your mineral balance, I mean, you know,
and insulin plays a big role there again, because if you're hyperinsulinemic, your kidneys will get continuously the signal to hold up the fluids and the minerals, and I think that will likely also improve on a carnivore diet.
And the thing with minerals, and it's funny that you said that there's a combination, because quite often they work in synergy. Like a lot of them work in different rings and different things. So, you know, it's yeah.
Well, it's funny how they got the clue on what it was, because they had a neighbor come over. This is how this whole thing started. So a neighbor comes over. He's an old neighbor. He's a pig farmer, and they're yakking away, and they're talking about some of the symptoms that she's having with her bipolar.
Yeah.
And that some of the other people that they know were having, and her mom, and that kind of thing. So they're having this big discussion, and he says, you know, he says, the behavior sounds just like something that happens with pigs called ear biting syndrome.
Yeah.
Where they start biting each other's ears and attacking and all this kind of stuff. And they solve it with a combination of minerals. So that's where they started. They started with the same combination of minerals that solves the ear biting with pigs. And damned if it didn't work. And over time, they refined it a little better, took out, you know, adjusted the amounts to be more appropriate for humans. And this is where all the research came in when they had the lab set up here in Canada. And, you know, the only reason they got raided and shut down was because it actually worked. They were a danger to the pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
So they absolutely had to be shut down here in Canada.
Yeah.
And the media was complicit. CBC radio literally lied on several occasions. I mean, I knew these people personally, so I knew the stuff that CBC was reporting was absolute bald-faced lies.
Mm-hmm.
Complete lies. And they actually got away with it. They never had to print a retraction, even when they proved the science and moved down to the States and proved it again and got approval and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it's funny you say
pigs.
It's funny you say pigs, because Peter Ballerstadt, a lot of his research comes from animal husbandry. And, you know, when farmers need to be good producers and keep their animals healthy, contrary to popular belief, but farming practices, they do care about the animals. They learn a lot about these stuff that goes on from the animals, you know, when they get sick, and especially with protein and his research anyway.
Yeah, that's funny. In real life, biologists and people also that work in this field, I can talk the best with. It's just they are reasonable people, and they know a lot about. Also, for example, when you talk about vitamin C and sugar competing, if I talk with my biologist parents, they say, yeah, of course, you're totally right. It's because because of the GLUT4 transporter, that sort of things.
Yeah, and you talk to a plant-based. Well, you never get vitamin C if you're a carnivore, and it's like, wow, just and it's interesting the mechanisms, right?
It was funny. I had this guy come at me on Twitter one time. Well, you're going to have scurvy in X amount of time. And I'm like, well, you know, there's 50-year plus carnivores that still haven't gotten scurvy. They're still waiting. Like, it's not the way it works. You know, and I was trying to explain to him about, you know, how when you're eating meat, you don't need it. And well, what about sailors? They got sick. Well, they were also eating like hardtack,
gruel,
flour-based. You know, they were eating and gruel and all kinds of stuff. That is what does the oxidative damage that makes you require vitamin C in the first place. If you're not eating it, You don't need vitamin C. You get as much as you need from the meat because
Yeah.
it does have some.
Yeah.
Yeah, and back in the day, that was the only way to bring vitamin C for long term during voyages was to take this citric acid in lemon. And even that would at some point expire and the vitamin C would disappear. But normally you can eat fresh meat. But yeah, of course, you cannot bring it for more than like 1 or 2 weeks, maybe if it's salted on a ship, and then the vitamin C is gone as well. But yeah, and that's the only research also done at some point where they tried to heal scurvy. Yeah, of course they grabbed for the lemon juice as test material and some other things, and not meat obviously, but meat would have worked as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In
another,
the absence of all the other stuff, right?
when settlers were first coming to the U.S. and they were having the issues with scurvy, the native population had him make tea out of pine needles,
Yeah.
which had the vitamin C in it. So,
Mm.
yeah,
Nature knows.
Nature knows. I mean, unlike many carnivores, I'm not against plant medicines
No.
because the way I think about it is that it stands to reason that if most plants can harm people, some plants can help people.
Absolutely.
And the bottom line is plant medicines have been used successfully for thousands of years. And I occasionally use plant medicines myself. Like if on the rare occasion that I get like a flu or something, since being carnivore, I'll take like a medicinal mushroom extract tincture.
Yeah, and if you just look at poison and antidote, that's in nature, right? The antidote's usually in nature. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's and minerals and certain plant medicines can definitely be a big help. If you're carnivore, chances are you won't need them, but that's not always true.
Yeah.
I need mineral supplements. I've tried going off them a couple times with my thyroid. It was damaged enough. I don't know for sure if I've got Hashimoto's. I might. My mom had it, and one of my doctors seemed to think I had it, but I didn't get the testing done.
How's your iodine? Are you taking iodine?
I am. Yeah, I take. Usually, I try and take Lugol's 5%, 2 or 3 drops a day.
Yeah.
If I can't get that for whatever reason, I'll pick up some nascent iodine. It's more expensive, but just as effective.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I take NAC. That's the main mineral.
That's cysteine. That's with glycine, cysteine, and glutamic acid. That's your glutathione. So that's really important.
Yeah. So it makes sense that it works.
And
so
it's also
it's
also what they give to people on if they ever overdose on painkillers, T3s, and all that stuff in the hospital. They'll give them N-acetylcysteine. It helps the liver right away. So it's really good for the liver.
Yeah, because I take like 900 milligrams of that a day, and then I also take 250 micrograms of selenium.
Yeah, good. Yeah. And I mean, to tie this into the carnivore with the minerals, I mean, listen, if the cow's not in the natural environment, the mineral spectrum is going to be a little bit different in the meat. So, you know what I mean? And that's where you gotta sort of think. I think the more sort of heavier modern day animal agriculture, you probably require a little bit more mineral supplementation.
And also cobalt. I mean, that's always used as an argument against carnivore diet. Like, we also don't get our B12 otherwise. But of course, it's totally different from their B12 supplementation because, if the soil is depleted of cobalt, because a grass-fed cow here, if it's on good ground, it doesn't need it.
No.
And B12, a vegan will always need B12. And I don't know when it was invented, but like 70, 80 years ago, maybe a century ago.
Yeah.
Well, if you feel you absolutely have to have B12 and other B vitamins, the best natural source is bee pollen.
Oh.
Oh, okay.
Bee pollen is almost pure B vitamins.
Interesting.
It is absolutely incredible. Yeah, you can take even if you've got major shortages, you can take like a teaspoon of it a day, and
Oh, wow.
have a ton of energy.
That's good to know
It's-
because I usually tell people nutritional yeast is a good option, but just got to watch it's not fortified.
Yeah, and a lot of nutritional yeast is synthetic.
Yeah.
I bought some and I was using it for cooking for flavoring.
Yeah.
And I started getting muscle cramps and getting sick from it.
Ah,
So I had to discontinue it, and it turned out somebody said, "Hey, it might be synthetic." And I looked into it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You got to
it was
be
synthetic.
very careful with it. Yeah, for sure. And then some like people that aren't carnivores, I tell them they should be taking liver. They should be eating liver. That's just, it's like the best multi.
Yeah, as a carnivore, we don't really need liver. A lot of people think they do, but
I actually just
from
like
all
it
the-
raw.
yeah, I love the taste, so I eat it. But I don't think if you're nothing but carnivore,
Yeah.
you really don't need it. All the research I've done says you don't have to have it, and if you eat too much liver, it can make you sick.
Yeah,
You can
well,
get-
there you
yeah,
go.
you should still
Vitamin
be
A
careful.
toxicity.
Not for the vitamin A so much, maybe, but also that is not a good idea to take too much. But especially the copper, I think,
Yeah, the copper
will mess
ratio.
up your zinc balance.
Yeah.
That's
So-
one thing I'm
so-
thinking about, actually, to incorporate something like oysters and to limit my liver intake, because much more than 3.5 ounces a week or so, or 4 ounces, you shouldn't go, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's
I
really
know-
dangerous with zinc.
I know one concern I've got for myself, and this can be a concern for some carnivores, and I don't know if it's an issue for me. I have no idea. I don't have any symptoms, but what can happen when you're carnivore, if you're eating almost exclusively beef, like if say you're on the lion diet, you can actually build up a level of toxicity in your blood of iron. It's a certain type of iron. I can't remember what it's called, but like iron, it comes in different types, and this specific one can be toxic if you get too much of a buildup. A very simple solution is to donate blood, and that gets rid of it.
Yeah.
If it's in excess. Unfortunately, because I've had myasthenia gravis, I'm prevented from donating blood. It's automatic disqualification unless I can prove somehow that I was cured. But
But that's a good thing for people that if you're like progressing on a carnivore diet and then all of a sudden you start to feel that like just not good. Try donating blood and just see what happens.
Yeah.
That'll correct that pretty quick.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
I
of
mean,
course measure your
other-
ferritin levels. I mean, or this other type of iron, because there are indeed. No, I think there's regular iron and ferritin, right?
Ferritin is the stored iron in your blood.
Yeah, I think that's the one they're talking about that you can get.
Well, the problem is with ferritin,
Toxic levels.
People that iron's a whole other. I mean, we could go down this forever, but all pathogens and everything wrong with you love iron. So when your body's sick or when something's wrong, it pulls the iron and stores it because it hoards it. So it can give people a false positive. Their ferritin levels look great, but that could be some kind of imbalance or something wrong, actually. So, I mean, I've dealt with iron deficient anemia and hemochromatosis with a lot of people, and quite often it's balance, B vitamins and copper. Like, it's so crazy, and it's quite often not the iron is the problem.
And that's the other solution too, is for the iron levels, is if you just, instead of eating nothing but beef all the time, have a little bit of balance, have some seafood, maybe have some chicken or some other types of meats, and then you won't be building up that level of iron all the time. Now, it's only a handful of carnivores eating nothing but beef that have this issue.
Yeah,
So I don't know how common it is. It doesn't seem to be that common, but it does happen. So I want people to be aware that it's possible.
Yeah.
And that it's something that they, if they start feeling, like you said, if they start feeling terrible and they don't really have a reason for it, that might be it. Go donate some blood or something.
Yeah. And I mean, and the idea is to anything chronic, you want to be concerned about it. But 1 or 2 days, there's so many things it could be. If it's something different, 1 day, that's fair enough. Like, I mean, I think we all get our microbiome shift, and I get like a bout of diarrhea 1 day, once in a while. It happens, but it's the chronic stuff. When it starts to like, okay, I'm not. When you and probably as you go in the carnivore, you're going to be going you're going uphill on the healing process. If that stall stops and you actually go with how you feel, that's when you start to go, okay, well, I'm not feeling good. Then start to look into things, look into the quality of your food, look into the mineral density, and the electrolytes for sure.
Well, I know I did notice a difference in just general how I felt. I mean, wasn't any real difference in health issues, so to speak, but I did notice I felt a little better when I shifted from store-bought hamburger
For
to
100%.
grass-fed, grass-finished.
I mean,
And
I've been
it
doing
made
this.
a difference for me.
I've been doing this for 4 years now, and I can tell my body works differently on different meat for sure. And
I could not imagine going back to supermarket meat. I mean, I would feel nauseated.
I sometimes, and listen, that doesn't mean if you can't, whatever you can afford, that you buy it. It's better than, not getting the meat. It is, but if you can, you'll start to feel the difference for sure in the different qualities and stuff. And that's something that if I eat a supermarket ground beef, I don't feel too good. And it's not that I feel bad. It's just I feel way different than I do when I'm eating.
Yeah, the same with
the same.
And also with cooked meat. In the beginning, I would cook it medium, or not really well done, but medium well, and that was fine. But nowadays, I mean, I eat a lot of raw, but also still blue rare or rare. But just the idea of cooking a thoroughly eating a thoroughly baked steak, it would also nauseate me. It would be heavy on the stomach.
Yeah.
And it's a bit the same like this supermarket meat. In the beginning, I would not really be able to appreciate the difference between something bought at the farm here or at the supermarket. And it is just amazing how these things it takes even 1 or 2 years before those subtle changes in your palate happen.
I mean, I feel the difference in eggs, and I feel the difference in the quality of meat, and it's the difference in for sure. Some meat makes me feel, and it's just, and for the new carnivores out there, just we're talking dollars, we're talking cents here. We're not talking, the difference between the start and getting into it is, this is the intuitive nutrient sensing comes online the longer you go, and that's where you start you master your own way, and that's the goods for sure.
Well, gentlemen, I think we've been running for quite a while here, so I think we'll call it a day on this webinar, and we hope to do some new ones, maybe like a new one in a couple of weeks.
Sure.
And this was kind of a test run. This first time that we've done a webinar together. So next time we're going to have like some actual, I don't know about PowerPoint, but we might have some slides and some stuff for you to look at in addition to just, telling you our stories and that kind of a thing. So look forward to that. Make sure to come back and catch that. Also, I'm going to be going live pretty soon with more interviews. I've got a few interviews lined up. I'm getting more lined up. Now, I'm not going to be putting them out as I get them. I'm going to do them like one at a time. Like once a week, I'm going to release them because I've got surgery coming up for my neck, and I'm going to be out for about 3 months, 2 to 3 months of healing after neck surgery. So I'm going to have those scheduled to release while I'm in. So keep an eye out for those. And we've got some fantastic interviews coming up. Some wonderful stories of healing on Carnivore. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And we will catch you on the next one, folks. Bye for now.